At my granddaughter's wedding, my name tag did not say Alice Whitmore. It said, the old lady who's paying for everything. I remember standing at the check-in table in the marble lobby of the Westbridge Hotel, holding that small rectangle of cream-colored cardstock between my fingers, waiting for my eyes to correct themselves. They did not. The young woman behind the table smiled the polite smile people use when they have no idea they are handing someone a knife wrapped in ribbon. The calligraphy was beautiful. That almost made it worse. The letters curled elegantly across the card, black ink on expensive paper, as if humiliation had been ordered with the floral arrangements and approved with the seating chart. I had arrived early because that is what women like me do. We arrive early. We make sure the gifts are wrapped, the checks clear, the flowers are paid for, and nobody important has been forgotten. I wore a pale blue dress with pearl buttons, the same shade my late husband Robert once said made my eyes look younger. Before leaving the house, I had stood in front of the bedroom mirror and fastened the strand of pearls he gave me on our 40th anniversary. For a moment, I imagined him behind me, straightening his tie, telling me not to worry so much. Madison would be beautiful. The day would be perfect. Family would feel like family again. That was what I wanted to believe. After Robert passed, I had held on to any excuse to gather everyone in one room and pretend the center of us had not disappeared. When Madison called me 6 months earlier, crying about wedding costs and saying her dream venue might slip away, I wrote the first check before she finished explaining. $85,000 spread across deposits, catering, flowers, photography, music, and the white rose arch Pamela said would look timeless in pictures. I told myself it was not about money. It was about giving my granddaughter a memory she could carry for the rest of her life. It was about honoring Robert, who adored that girl from the day she was born. So when the wedding invitations arrived on thick paper with gold lettering, I smiled. When Pamela called to say there had been a few upgrades, I said yes. When Richard, my only son, told me I was being generous, I chose to hear love in his voice instead of relief. But now I stood in that lobby, staring at a name tag that reduced my entire life to a wallet with wrinkles. The young woman asked if something was wrong. I looked up at her, then down at the card again. Across the lobby, guests moved past me in suits and pastel dresses, carrying small clutch purses and laughing softly beneath the chandelier. Somewhere beyond the double doors, a string quartet was playing. Everything looked graceful. Everything sounded expensive. I could have asked for another tag. I could have slipped this one into my purse and pretended the mistake had never happened. Instead, I peeled off the backing, pressed it carefully to the left side of my dress, right above my heart, and smoothed the edges with 2 fingers. Then I lifted my chin, stepped toward the ballroom doors, and made myself a promise. I would not remove it. Not yet. I wanted to see who would laugh. The ballroom doors opened with a quiet pull, and for 1 second the brightness inside almost made me forget the card on my chest. White roses climbed the columns. Gold candles flickered along every table. A crystal chandelier scattered light across the polished floor as if the whole room had been dipped in champagne. Madison had chosen well, or rather, Pamela had chosen well and sent me the invoices. The place looked like something from a bridal magazine, all soft music and expensive linen, the kind of beauty that makes people lower their voices without realizing it. I stepped inside slowly, feeling the name tag rise and fall with each breath. At first, nobody seemed to notice. Then a woman in a lavender dress looked at me, smiled, and glanced down. Her smile froze for half a second before she turned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. A man near the bar read it twice, then looked away too quickly. 2 younger guests standing by the seating chart gave each other the kind of look people share when they want to laugh, but know they should not. I kept walking. My shoes made no sound against the carpet. That was the strange thing about humiliation. It could fill an entire room and still remain perfectly quiet. I found my table near the front, close enough to see the sweetheart table, but not close enough to feel included. My place card said Mrs. Alice Whitmore, proper and respectful, as if the insult pinned to my dress belonged to some other woman. I touched the pearls at my throat and thought of Robert. He would have noticed immediately. He would have taken the card from me, found whoever was responsible, and spoken in that calm voice of his that always made people straighten their backs. But Robert was not there. Only his money was. Only the memory of what he had built, what I had protected, what they had learned to ask for without shame. Pamela found me before I sat down. She came across the ballroom in a blush-pink gown, smiling like a woman greeting an honored guest for the benefit of witnesses. Her blonde hair was swept into a smooth twist, her earrings catching the light with every step. "Alice," she said warmly, opening her arms. "There you are." We were wondering when our generous Alice would arrive. She hugged me lightly, careful not to wrinkle her dress, then placed one manicured hand right over the name tag. Not to cover it, to draw attention to it. A few people nearby smiled. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but my face stayed still. "It is a beautiful room," I said. Pamela tilted her head. "Well, you helped make it possible." Her voice was sweet enough to serve with cake. Across the room, I saw Richard near the bar. "My son. My only child." He looked directly at the card on my chest, and something uncomfortable crossed his face. Not outrage. Not concern. Embarrassment. He came over quickly and lowered his voice. "Mom, please do not make this a thing." I looked at him for a moment, waiting for the sentence that should have come next. "Who did this to you? Are you okay? I will fix it." None of those words came. Behind him, Madison stood in her wedding gown, laughing as her bridesmaids adjusted her veil. She was radiant, untouched by the ugliness moving quietly around her. She did not see my name tag. Maybe Pamela had made sure of that. Richard shifted his weight and glanced toward his wife, waiting for me to behave. That was when I understood something I had been avoiding for years. He was not ashamed that I had been hurt. He was ashamed that I might let people notice. Richard stood in front of me with that careful expression people wear when they want peace without justice. His hand hovered near my elbow, not touching me, not comforting me, simply guiding me away from visibility. I looked past him at Pamela, who was speaking with two women near the champagne tower. She laughed at something one of them said, then glanced in my direction. Her eyes dropped to my chest. Her smile widened by the smallest amount. That was all I needed to see. This had not been a printer error. This had not been a rushed mistake by a wedding planner with too many cards to sort. It had a pulse. It had intention. During cocktail hour, I moved through the room with a glass of sparkling water I never drank, listening to conversations break apart whenever I came too close. People are rarely as quiet as they think they are. Near the entrance to the terrace, two cousins from Pamela's side stood beside a tall arrangement of white hydrangeas. One of them leaned in and whispered, "I cannot believe Pamela actually printed it." The other gave a small laugh and said, "She said Alice would probably think it was cute." They both turned when they sensed me behind them. Their faces changed at the same time. Surprise first, then guilt, then the polite blankness of people pretending the words had not already left their mouths. I smiled at them, not warmly, just enough to make them look down. A few minutes later, near the seating chart, I heard one of the groomsmen say, "Is that Grandma Wallet?" The nickname landed softly, almost playfully, but I felt it settle somewhere deep inside me. Grandma Wallet. Not grandmother. Not Alice. Not the woman who had rocked Madison through ear infections, mailed birthday cards with handwritten notes, brought casseroles when Pamela said she was overwhelmed, and kept quiet whenever Richard forgot to call. Grandma Wallet. I walked to the restroom because I needed a door between me and that ballroom. Inside, the music became muffled, distant, almost underwater. The restroom was beautiful, with gold fixtures, white marble counters, and a vase of fresh lilies by the mirror. I set my glass down and looked at myself. Pale blue dress, pearls at my throat, silver hair brushed smooth, lipstick carefully applied in the same soft rose shade I had worn to church for years. And there, pinned above my heart, the joke they had decided I was supposed to accept. I touched the edge of the card, but I did not remove it. My fingers were steady. That surprised me. I thought I would be shaking. I thought I would cry. Instead, memories began arranging themselves in a way they never had before. Pamela laughing when I offered to help with the rehearsal dinner, saying, "You are already helping in the way that matters." Richard telling me the wedding was expensive, but these things happen only once. Madison hugging me when I mailed the deposit for the venue, saying I was the best grandmother in the world. At the time, I had believed her. Maybe part of her had meant it. That was what made it ache. Love and use can wear the same face when money sits between them. I leaned closer to the mirror and read the card again. The old lady, paying for everything. For the first time that evening, I did not feel confused. I felt clear. The card had not created the truth. It had only printed what they had been saying about me when I was not in the room. I picked up my glass, opened the restroom door, and returned to the wedding with the same quiet smile. But something in me had stepped back. Something in me had begun to watch. When I returned to the ballroom, dinner service had begun. Silver lids lifted from plates. Glasses chimed softly. Servers moved between tables with the calm precision of people trained to make wealth feel effortless. I sat down at my assigned seat and unfolded the linen napkin across my lap. Across the room, Pamela was glowing. She moved from guest to guest with her hand resting lightly on Richard's arm, accepting compliments as if the wedding were an award she had won. Every few minutes, someone thanked her for such a beautiful evening. She would smile and say, "We just wanted Madison to have everything she deserved." We. That word followed me through dinner like a small bell. We had chosen the flowers. We had upgraded the menu. We had hired the live band. But when invoices arrived, there was never a we. There was only my checkbook on the kitchen table, my reading glasses slipping down my nose, my pen moving across one more line while Pamela explained that prices had gone up, that deposits were due, that it would break Madison's heart to settle for less. I cut a small piece of chicken and placed it in my mouth, though I could not taste it. The card on my dress seemed heavier now, pulling at the fabric with every breath. I thought back to the first time Pamela asked me for money. It was not for the wedding. It was years before that, when she and Richard were buying their first house outside Richmond. She called me in tears, saying the closing costs were more than they expected and they might lose the place. Robert was still alive then. He listened quietly while I held the phone, then wrote them a check for $12,000 before dinner. Family helps family, Pamela said when she hugged us in the driveway of that new house. I believed her. Later came the credit card balance she called a misunderstanding. Then preschool tuition for Madison. Then summer camp. Then the emergency roof repair that somehow became a kitchen remodel with marble counters and brass fixtures. Each request arrived dressed as necessity. Each yes from me was treated not as kindness, but as confirmation that another yes would come. After Robert died, the asking became softer, almost ceremonial. Pamela learned to mention his name when she wanted something. Robert would have loved seeing Madison in that venue. Robert always believed in doing things beautifully. Robert would not want us fighting over money. She used my grief like a key, turning it gently until the lock opened. I told myself I was helping my family heal. I told myself generosity was not foolish if it came from love. Then I remembered the winter after my knee surgery, when I called Richard to ask if he could drive me to a follow-up appointment because the roads were icy. Pamela answered his phone and said they were swamped that week. I took a cab. The fare was $36 each way, and the driver waited while I walked carefully across the parking lot with my cane. No one asked how I got home. No one asked if I needed groceries. But 3 weeks later, Pamela called about the photographer's second payment. I looked around the ballroom at the flowers I had paid for, the candles I had paid for, the band playing beneath the lights I had paid for. The truth did not arrive loudly. It settled over me, quiet and complete. I had not been invited as a grandmother. I had been billed as one. The first person who looked at the card and did not smile was Martin Hayes. I saw him during the salad course, standing near the far wall with a glass of iced tea in his hand, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his posture as straight as it had been the day he read Robert's will in my living room. Martin had been more than Robert's attorney. He had been his college roommate, his golf partner, the man who sat beside me at the hospital when the doctors used careful words and Robert squeezed my hand under the blanket. I had not expected him to come, but Madison had loved him as Uncle Martin since she was small, and Robert had always said family was not only blood. Martin saw me before I could look away. His eyes moved from my face to the card on my dress. Something in his expression changed so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. Not shock, not pity, recognition, followed by a sadness so heavy it seemed to age him in front of me. He set down his glass and crossed the ballroom without hurry. That was Martin's way. He never rushed, not even toward bad news. "Alice," he said softly when he reached my chair. "Would you mind stepping out with me for a moment?" Pamela was watching from the head table. I felt her eyes follow us as I stood. Richard looked up, then looked down again at his plate. Martin offered his arm, not because I needed help, but because he understood dignity. We walked through the side doors into a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of old Charleston weddings. The music faded behind us. For the first time all evening, I could hear myself breathe. Martin turned to face me beneath a brass wall sconce. "Who made that card?" he asked. His voice was low, but there was steel underneath it. I looked down at the words, then back at him. I believe Pamela arranged it. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Robert was afraid this day might come. The sentence struck me more deeply than the name tag had. I folded my hands around my small clutch purse. What do you mean? Martin reached inside his jacket and removed a sealed envelope, worn slightly at the edges, as if it had been carried for a long time, but opened rarely. He did not hand it to me at first. He held it between us with both hands. Before Robert passed, he amended the family trust. He did not want to frighten you. He did not want you living as if everyone around you was waiting to disappoint you. But he had concerns. About Richard? I asked, though I already knew the answer was larger than that. About anyone who might mistake your kindness for access, Martin said. Anyone who might pressure you, publicly humiliate you, or use family obligation to drain what Robert left to protect you. The hallway seemed to narrow. I thought of every check, every phone call, every soft mention of Robert's name when Pamela wanted another payment. Martin continued carefully. There is a protective clause. If Richard, Pamela, or any direct beneficiary is shown to have financially exploited you, coerced you, or publicly degraded you in connection with family assets, their distributions can be suspended pending review by the trustee. I stared at the envelope. My first feeling was not relief. It was grief. Robert had seen something I refused to see. My husband, even while facing the end of his own life, had been trying to leave a fence around me because he knew I would keep opening the gate. Martin finally placed the envelope in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Does Pamela know about this? I asked. No, Martin said. Richard does not know either. Robert wanted them to treat you well because they loved you, not because they were afraid of losing money. I looked back toward the ballroom doors, where laughter rose and fell behind the wood. Pamela thought she had pinned the truth to my dress. She had no idea Robert had already put the truth in writing. I slipped the envelope into my purse before Martin and I returned to the ballroom. He did not tell me what to do. That was another kindness. He simply walked beside me until we reached the side doors, then said, "Whatever you decide, Alice, I am here." I nodded once and stepped back into the music, the candlelight, the soft clatter of forks against china. Everything appeared unchanged. That was how family cruelty often survived. It knew how to dress itself for photographs. I had barely reached my seat when Pamela appeared beside me, her smile stretched a little too tightly at the corners. "Alice, sweetheart, could I borrow you for just a minute?" There was no sweetness in the way she touched my shoulder. Her fingers pressed through the fabric of my dress with quiet ownership. Richard stood a few feet behind her, holding his phone, looking like a man who had already decided silence was safer than loyalty. Pamela led me to a small room off the hallway where the wedding coordinator had left extra programs, ribbon, and boxes of emergency supplies. The door closed softly behind us. The music became a hum. Pamela turned around with a folder in her hand. I noticed her smile disappear the moment there were no guests to perform for. "There are just a few final balances we need to handle tonight," she said, opening the folder on a narrow table. "Nothing dramatic. Just the overage for the bar, the upgraded floral installation, the extra hour for the photographer, and the after-party transportation." She slid a printed invoice toward me. The total at the bottom was $18,700. I looked at the number, then at her face. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were steady. This had been planned too. "I assume these were approved before tonight," I said. Pamela gave a small laugh. "Well, weddings move quickly. You know how it is. Madison deserves a perfect day." She tapped the paper with one polished fingernail. "We would hate for anything to become awkward with vendors before the reception is over." Richard stepped closer to the table, but still did not look directly at me. "Mom, it would just be easier to take care of it now." Easier. That word had followed me for years. It was easier if I paid the deposit. Easier if I did not ask questions. Easier if I came for holidays only when invited. Easier if I pretended Pamela's sharp little remarks were jokes. I placed my purse on the table, careful and slow. "Did you know about the name tag?" I asked Richard. The room went quiet in a way the ballroom never had. Pamela crossed her arms. "Alice, please. It was harmless. People joke at weddings." I did not look at her. I looked only at my son. Richard swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the card on my dress and away again. "Mom, this is not the time." There it was. Not an answer, but an admission wearing a clean shirt. I felt something inside me settle into place, like a lock turning for the final time. Pamela sighed, impatient now. Are you really going to make Madison's wedding about your feelings? I looked down at the invoice again. $18,700. A number large enough to matter, small enough that they thought my pride would cost less. I picked up the paper, folded it once, and placed it back on the table. No, I said quietly. Tonight is not about my feelings. It is about what I am finally willing to stop paying for. I did not raise my voice in that small room. I did not tear the invoice. I did not demand an apology from people who had already shown me the price of their respect. I simply picked up my purse and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving Pamela, Richard, and that folded paper behind me. Pamela called my name once, softly at first, then sharper when I did not turn around. I kept walking. The hallway lights reflected off the polished floor, and for a moment I could see myself there, a pale blue shape moving through all that gold and cream, older than most of the guests, slower than I used to be, but not weak. Weakness was not silence. I had confused the two for too long. At the edge of the ballroom, the band was finishing a slow song. The lead singer, a kind-looking man with silver at his temples, stepped down to take a sip of water. I approached him before I could talk myself out of it. Excuse me, I said. I am Madison's grandmother. I was told there would be a family toast before the father and daughter dance. He glanced at the schedule clipped to a music stand. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Whitmore said she would introduce it after dessert. I smiled at the sound of Pamela's title. Mrs. Whitmore. She wore my family name as if she had polished it herself. Would it be possible for me to speak first? I asked, just briefly. The singer looked toward the head table, then back at me. Of course, ma'am. Just give me a signal. I thanked him and returned to my seat. My hands were still steady. That almost frightened me. I opened my purse and took out the speech I had written 3 nights earlier at my kitchen table. It was folded twice. The paper softened from being handled. I had written it in blue ink because Robert always said blue ink looked more personal. There were lines about Madison as a little girl chasing fireflies in our backyard. Lines about marriage being patience, kindness, and choosing each other on ordinary days. I had written Robert's name in the last paragraph and stopped for nearly 10 minutes before I could finish. It was a good speech. A loving speech. A speech written by a woman who still believed that if she gave enough, stayed quiet enough, forgave enough, the family would eventually remember her heart instead of her bank account. I read the first sentence, then folded the paper again. Not angrily. Carefully. Like putting away a dress that no longer fit. Across the room, Madison laughed as her new husband leaned close to say something in her ear. She looked so young, so hopeful, so unaware of the web Pamela had spun around this day. I did not want to ruin her wedding. That thought passed through me more than once. Then another thought followed it, clearer and colder. Pamela had already brought ugliness into the room. I was only going to turn on the lights. Martin sat 2 tables away, watching me with quiet concern. I touched my purse where the envelope rested inside. The protective clause. Robert's last fence around me. I wondered how many times he had seen Pamela's eyes change when money was mentioned. I wondered how many nights he had lain awake beside me, knowing I would defend people who were learning to use my goodness against me. Dessert plates arrived. The lights dimmed slightly. Pamela stood at the head table and lifted her glass, smiling as if nothing in the world could reach her. Before she could speak, I looked at the band leader and gave him a small nod. The band leader understood before Pamela did. He stepped to the microphone, adjusted it with a small tap, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, before the next dance, Madison's grandmother would like to say a few words." Pamela turned toward me so quickly that the smile almost fell from her face. Richard looked as if someone had pulled his chair out from under him, though he was still standing. I rose slowly, smoothing the front of my blue dress with both hands. The name tag remained exactly where I had placed it. Every step to the microphone felt longer than it was. I could feel people watching me now, not with hidden amusement, but with curiosity. Maybe some of them expected a sweet grandmother toast. Maybe some expected an awkward little joke about money. I placed my purse on the small table beside the microphone and looked at Madison first. Her eyes were bright from the evening, her veil tucked behind one shoulder, her new husband holding her hand. My heart softened when I saw her face. None of what I was about to say was meant to wound her. It was meant to stop a wound from being passed down as normal. I began gently. When Madison was 5 years old, she used to chase fireflies in my backyard with a jelly jar in her hands. Robert would tell her to poke holes in the lid so the little things could breathe, and she would look up at him like he had handed her the secrets of the universe. A few guests smiled. Madison covered her mouth, already emotional. I continued. Robert loved this family. He believed a family name was not something printed on invitations or displayed in photographs. He believed it was something proven by how we treat one another when nobody is applauding. Pamela's smile had gone still. Richard stared at the floor. I reached up then and unpinned the card from my dress. The room was so quiet I heard the tiny sound of the pin sliding free. I held the card up between my fingers. When I arrived tonight, this was waiting for me. I read the words aloud, slowly, without bitterness, without raising my voice. A ripple moved through the ballroom. Not laughter this time. Something closer to discomfort. Chairs shifted. Someone whispered, "Oh my goodness." Madison's face changed. She looked from the card to her mother, then to Richard, then back to me. I saw the moment she understood that this had not been a harmless mix-up. I placed the card flat on the table beside the microphone and opened my purse. My fingers found Robert's envelope. Martin stood near his table, one hand resting on the back of a chair, ready if I needed him. I did not. My voice remained calm. Before Robert passed, he created a family trust to protect what we built together. I unfolded the document and read only the part that mattered. Any direct beneficiary who attempts to exploit, coerce, or publicly degrade Alice Whitmore in connection with family assets may have distributions suspended pending trustee review. The words sounded formal, almost cold, but in that room they landed with more force than anger ever could. Pamela's face drained of color beneath her makeup. Richard finally looked at me, really looked at me, but it was too late for the expression he should have worn at the beginning. I folded the paper again and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I looked at Pamela, not as an enemy, but as someone who had mistaken restraint for permission. I paid for flowers, music, food, and a beautiful room, I said. I did not pay to be made small in front of the people I helped gather here. Madison began to cry softly, and her husband put an arm around her shoulders. I turned back to my granddaughter. I love you, sweetheart. I hope your marriage is kinder than this moment. Then I stepped away from the microphone, leaving the card on the table for everyone to see. For several seconds after I left the microphone, the ballroom did not move. The band did not begin playing. The servers paused with coffee pots in their hands. Even the candles seemed quieter. I walked back to the small table and picked up my purse, but I left the card exactly where it was, face up under the warm light. Pamela reached it before I reached the aisle. She snatched it from the table as if removing the evidence could erase what everyone had heard. Her fingers shook. "Alice," she whispered sharply, but whispers carry when a room is silent. "How could you do this to Madison?" I looked at my granddaughter. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she was not looking at me with anger. She was looking at her mother with a pain I recognized too well, the pain of seeing someone clearly for the first time. Richard stepped toward me, his face pale. "Mom, we can talk about this privately." That almost made me smile. Privately was where they had always wanted me. Private checks, private insults, private disappointments I was expected to swallow so public photographs could remain pretty. Martin came to my side without a word, and that quiet support gave me more strength than any speech could have. I turned to Richard and said, "We had years to talk privately. You used them to look away." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing useful left for him to say. Pamela still held the card, crumpling one corner between her thumb and forefinger. "This is cruel," she said. "After everything we have done to include you." I looked at her then, really looked at her. The perfect hair, the expensive gown, the practiced, wounded expression. For years, I had mistaken polish for grace. They are not the same thing. "No, Pamela," I said quietly. "You included my money. You tolerated me." The words did not need volume. They were true enough on their own. Madison rose from her chair, but I lifted one hand gently, not to stop her from coming to me, but to spare her from having to choose in front of everyone on a day that should have belonged to her. I walked to her table and kissed her cheek. She held my hand so tightly that I felt the small tremor in her fingers. "I am sorry, Grandma," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "Be happy," I said, "but be honest about who helps you build that happiness." Then I placed Pamela's invoice on the edge of the head table, folded once, just as I had left it in the side room. "Any remaining balances can go through Martin," I said. "The trust will review everything from this evening forward." Martin nodded. Pamela looked as if the floor had shifted beneath her shoes. Richard stared at the invoice like it had spoken his name. I did not ask for the $85,000 back. That money was gone, and in a strange way, it had bought me something more valuable than flowers or music. It had bought me proof. I turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. No one stopped me. The hallway outside felt cool and still. Behind me, the wedding slowly resumed, but the sound was different now, thinner, uncertain. Martin walked me to the lobby and offered to call a car. I told him I already had one waiting. Outside, Charleston air wrapped around my shoulders, warm and damp, carrying the faint scent of rain and gardenias from the hotel entrance. I stood beneath the awning for a moment and looked through the glass doors at the bright room I had paid to fill. For the first time all evening, I did not feel small. I did not feel erased. I felt tired, yes, and sad in a place too deep for tears, but also strangely light. Pamela had been right about one thing. I had paid for everything. But not anymore.